Hello, I'm Teresa from capturingthecharmlife.com, and I am here to help you turn your homeschool challenges into your homeschool charms. I'm glad you're here. I'm just going to have a sip of my tea. This is a store-bought tea. This is a pomegranate raspberry tea. And the reason I say store-bought is because I have a container of chamomile blossoms that I am going to turn into German chamomile tea, which has medicinal properties like helping tummies and when they're feeling unwell and that sort of thing. I like cutting different things and growing different things in my tea garden, like mints and anise hyssop and lavender. I've got all sorts of different things that I use for teas throughout the year. And since my kids were helping me grocery shop last week, and I said, would you start grocery shopping, take the cart, move around the grocery store as you will, and put things in there that you think that we need, they started with store-bought tea. So I'm enjoying the Twinings pomegranate raspberry in my United Nations teacup. All right. So tell me about you. Where are you at this week? Is this your second or third week homeschooling for this season? This is my second week, and everything's going fairly well so far. That's because I am taking my own advice, and I will tell you more about that when we talk about structuring an education for an 11-year-old. Before we do that, I asked the audience, what is the biggest struggle when it comes to homeschool planning? And just this morning, I actually heard from someone that asked the question that their kids are in a variety of different ages and grades. And so they're coming from a schooled environment, they're coming home, they're going to homeschool, they want to create a routine that works for everybody. And they are a broad spectrum of grades. So it's everything from grade 8 to, I think it was about grade 2. And there's 4 of them. So it is a broad spectrum. And just last week, I rewrote a post about a tale of 4 grades, having 4 kids in different grades, theoretical grades, because you and I both know that I don't value the grades as much as the system does, but right across the spectrum in general aptitudes and skills, and how to create a routine for that purpose. Well, my first piece of advice really is, what do you want to include in your day? You're going to remember that you are not bringing school home. Even in the most classical school or homeschooled scenarios, it's still not a school. It still doesn't function like a school. You're a mom. You have a lot fewer students. You probably haven't birthed 25 to 30 children. But if you have, let's chat. I would love to hear about that. But you have probably had somewhere, I don't know, industry average, I think it's about 4 kids. But I know I've met all the families across the spectrum. I have met the family of 13, and I've met the family of I haven't had kids yet. And of course, the singletons and 2s and 3s and 4s and whatever. We all have different scenarios, but we all have different kids that are very different. So we have to engage them where they're at rather than on grade level. You want to include particular things in your day. You get to decide what that is. I have a list of possibly things that a lot of homeschool moms have settled on, but certainly they are core ideas that we like to include in our day, like physical exercise, being outside, a read aloud time, quiet time in the afternoons, formal, maybe instructional time, or pursuing creative learning opportunities, as I call it. Of course, there might be a cleanup time. There might be a poetry tea time in the week somewhere. There might be cooking lessons in the week somewhere. You get the idea. It could be any number of things. It could be any number of activities. You get to include it. The goal is to time block. Recognize how much time does it actually take for me to do this? Is there a child in the house or a few that you might have to entertain or occupy in some form or fashion before you can do that activity? you can see where it sounds like a great idea to slot everything into a big schedule and say, this is what we're going to do at 10, and this is what we're doing at 10:30, and this is what we're doing at 11:22. And I have been that mom that has done that. And that is a recipe for overwhelm. It's a recipe for frustration, certainly a recipe for impatience with your children. And I know from experience, and I know a lot of people that have had that same experience. So take it from us, it's not worth your effort. Doing a few things with clarity and with effort, or with a focused energy, is better than doing a whole bunch of things. So you get to decide what you're going to put into your weekday routine, or your routine. And then you have to decide, how much time does it actually take you? What are the logistics in actually causing that thing to happen? And do I have enough time? Include downtime, include separate time. By the way, I discuss all these things in my course, How to Homeschool 101, which I think might be more aptly named How to Transition from Public School to a Homeschool. So if you're interested in that, you can find that at the top of my page, Facebook page, Capturing the Charmed Life. It's on a teachable platform. And I have a mini course that is free if you want to get a sense of what I'm about and what I'm going to offer. But the content of what I just finished sharing with you is actually on the main course, the paid course. So I was going to share with you a little bit of what I was reading about homeschooling this week. And perhaps to not your surprise, I am going to share a few more tidbits from the book Parenting with Patience by Judy Arnall. This book is so informative, is so detailed. You don't miss a beat in this book. Parenting with Patience is really about understanding your kids. She says you can turn frustration into connection with 3 easy steps. You see that? I just posted a podcast episode with Judy this morning about how to deal with anger, which does definitely coincide with this book. So I'm going to share one passage from Parenting with Patience. And you can see what I see as this is a very valuable book. She is a homeschool mom of 5 who is a certified family life educator, a distinguished Toastmaster, keynote speaker, and she specializes in child development and non-punitive parenting and education practices which enhance family relationships. And she has definitely got the experience to back up all of her ideas. She says that your job is to help your child gain back self-regulation, emotional self-regulation, also called executive function. Self-regulation is the ability to control impulses, even in the heat of anger. And I don't know about you, some of us have been taught early on how to engage anger and intense emotions and comfortable emotions. I wasn't one of them. So this book is so useful for me, even still, even though I've learned plenty along the way, but I'm still learning. And not only do we have to learn this ourselves, but we most definitely have to engage our kids. And I would suggest to you, it's their biggest skill that they can take away from us as parents is emotional self-regulation. It will fuel the ability to do everything that we want to do in life, because we are walking humans with just a mix of emotion, and emotion is human. And so we're always walking around with different emotions. And when we learn how to manage them or regulate them, I think we just are more at peace, probably. I kind of want to say we're happier, but I don't think that's necessarily true, because I think all of the uncomfortable feelings that we have, whether they're anger or frustration or impatience or sadness or depression or confusion or, you name the emotion, I think they're human. So we're not supposed to not feel them. They are a reminder that we are reacting to something in our world that we need to engage with intention. And this author does a fabulous job, Judy Arnall, of laying it all out, giving us clarity on how to engage self-regulation with our kids. So I encourage you to check out her book, Parenting with Patience. I wanted to share with you today the structuring of an education for an 11-year-old. Having said that, I have one 11-year-old of many, probably millions of 11-year-olds right now. And even in my own home, I've had 4 11-year-olds, and not one of those 11-year-olds is the same. They have different interests, they learn differently, they engage each other differently, they have different capacities or aptitudes or natural tendencies. And I believe that they all come into the world for different reasons and have different purposes here. So because of that, I don't think the content I'm giving you today is transferable necessarily to your specific 11-year-old. It might be. It certainly is food for thought and ideas for you. So specifically today, I thought I would engage the discussion of science topics. That's something that our family loves. In fact, I certainly love it. Discovering how things work, how they function, memorizing the elements of the periodic table, assembling maybe different boxes of physics activities, and performing chemistry experiments, everything from like stuff in an actual chemistry book to Mentos and Diet Coke. We're definitely all interested in science topics. And you'd think it was because their dad is a doctor, a medical doctor, but actually his passion is more history and politics and economics. But still, our kids have naturally learned hospital codes. They probably know them better than my husband. Yeah, there's certain codes that just rarely get used, right? And so the kids memorize the codes on the back of his hospital ID and quiz each other. And they've listened to stories all the way growing up about baby deliveries. And, you know, he's brought home different instruments to show them how he might do an epidural, or they, you know, he taught them how to stitch humans. And, you know, labor and delivery stories for many years. And we were overseas in Africa twice with him. He was volunteering at a hospital. So we all got to go on rounds. We even got to go into the OR with him, which he could not do here. Watch open abdominal surgery, help him with the anesthetics. That we've had all sorts of science experiments, some of them pretty outrageous, but actually my second daughter is curious, possibly considering sciences to go towards medicine. And last year she wrote a story that was published in the old Schoolhouse magazine called her mini medical residency, which I think is a really neat tale about how she got introduced to medicine, and even a picture of her in the OR with her anesthesia dad. So that's our background in science. And no, I didn't tell you the very significant thing for me too, is that I did nursing school before I had kids as well. So I always had that interest myself. We've got a lot of interest in science across the family, and much to the chagrin of my second daughter, who has almost homeschooled all the way through. She's in her final year, and she has taken Apologia online classes for chemistry, biology, and physics. And those classes do not miss a beat. There is a lot of content, fabulous detail that even in my nursing school, they didn't cover to that extent. And so many lab, you know, like, what am I saying? Lab reports and labs that they actually do in the kitchen, but way many more than her public school sister did in similar classes. So I find that interesting, that some people will actually ask her, well, are you missing out on doing those science labs at school? But the truth is she's doing tons of them. And her public high school sister didn't have tons of them. In fact, I think she had one or two. So, you know, there are incredible resources available online, and you can order actual lab equipment and all the stuff that comes with it from a variety of places online, of course, but I tend to use this catalog, Home Science Tools, and they are reliable. They've always got good content. They've got absolutely everything that I've needed. Science is everywhere, to my surprise, just like math. I remember thinking that I would like to unschool math. I would like to not do math as a homeschool parent. Math, solve your own problems, they say. And I had enough of math before I finished high school. So I was not so sad about radically unschooling math for 6 months. And to my surprise, you can't get away from math. If you are going to buy something, if you are going to measure something, if you are going to cook or bake or tip someone at a restaurant, so many different ways you are going to use math. And the same thing with science. You will run into science everywhere you go, even when your children are really little, if not often when they're really little and they're fascinated by the spiders that are in the bathroom corner, or they want to know how frogs develop, or they find something in a pond that they're curious about, or they compare leaves, or all sorts of different nature things. Science is everywhere. Natural sciences, easy. Go outside at night, you see stars. Astronomy studies are online for homeschoolers. There are resources online, there are classes online, and there are apps that actually help you learn constellations. You can make games out of the constellations. You're learning constellations and moon phases. You can every day, just like you keep track of the weather, maybe someone's keeping track of the weather on a calendar or on a monthly calendar, you could also keep track of where the moon is at. I think my favorite moon cycle activity was using Oreos. You get to chew them into the shape of the day's moon cycle. Yeah, that's a keeper. Have you ever done the constellations with skewers and mini marshmallows? That also works. There's, of course, vinegar and baking soda concoctions that you're pretty much going to find your entire homeschool years on the kitchen counter, because in my experience as a homeschool parent, there is almost always something on a kitchen counter that belongs to somebody's science experiment. Recently, in the last year and a half, 2 of my girls have done a biology course online, and a bunch of different labs require preserved animals like fish and crayfish and frogs and is it crab? All sorts of different things that I have to order from Home Science Tools and look really gross coming in the mail. But these things are accessible online. Just like we've done a lot of bacterial studies around the house, doing swabs to see what the most dirty places are around. And by the way, it usually is the kitchen sink, and it's not the toilet. But that is such a fun activity to do with kids. There's also blood tests. If your kids are willing to have their finger pricked, you can find out what their blood tests are at home. You can grow butterflies. You can dissect owl pellets. You name the science experiment. It can definitely, and probably has definitely been done at home. The only ones I don't really care for are the gravitational types of experiments where people drop things from 17-foot distances or heights and hope or want to see how it's going to cause a reaction in their sibling. We've been there, done that too. And so far, no one has died. We've used textbooks and workbooks, and I'm going to show you a few actually of the things that I've used that are the most effective or for some of our kids. Now, I'm going to tell you, it can be an 11-year-old, it can be a 17-year-old. The only thing that you really need is a child who cares that they're doing it. So I'm going to show you a few things that different 11-year-olds in my world have used. Have you seen or heard these? These are the Make Block MBOTs, educational robot kits. They are pretty pricey. You usually end up getting them at Christmas sometime. But something like this, they see play, you see engineering. Here is a National Geographic's glow-in-the-dark crystal lab. Grow crystals that glow in the dark. So much fun. You get to have at least one of these in your childhood, right? And this here, I see, my kids see play, and I see, I don't know, chemistry, geology. I love these kits. I think it's by Thames and Cosmos. Physics Discovery Kits. They say ages 8 plus. So you can guess based on your child. If your child is always building the Lego sets by themselves, they will be just fine with this. And again, your child sees play and you see physics. If you are wanting your child to understand, and they're at the age where they're able to understand the different laws in the physics things that they're building, these books come with a physics discovery book, an experiment manual that actually helps guide them into understanding what the point is of that experiment. This one is the water wheel crane. If your child likes building things, these kits are useful and entertaining, also educational. All three of my girls, no, two of my girls and my youngest, my son, who is 11 right now, has used the Chem C500 kit. It says ages 10 and up, but again, is it your child or is your child capable of doing it? Chem C500. So your child sees fun and you see chemistry. And so this is the Chemistry C500 experiment manual. So it'll tell you not just how to do the experiment, it'll do that, but it will also explain to you why. So this is an electrochemical reaction, and it will explain what's happening. Over the years, at different times, the kids that are a little bit more academic focused, that really actually want to have a routine, and they definitely want to write down what they're doing, you can actually easily find a free printable lab process online so that the kids can get into familiarity with how to write up a lab experiment. It's very basic. Of course, Apologia in the high school level years is anything but basic. So you can gradually transition into that if your child is interested in science. I might add that the younger kids in homeschool always are benefited by the older ones, because if they're interested in a science activity, like an experiment that maybe the 17-year-old is doing in her class, then my 11-year-old tags along. So last year he got to do biology experiments with his just older sister, and he got to do physics experiments with his oldest sister at home. So there is the benefit, of course, of being the youngest child. And in my experience with science or history or geography or current affairs, all of the content that you share with any of those kids is really a discussion point you can have with all of them at the same time. They'll engage differently. That's not the point. You can share it. They won't necessarily absorb the same things. They might not necessarily be at the same developmental stages, but they definitely are engaging in some form. And you can tell based on how they are discussing it, or maybe you ask a question and they answer it differently. But because one is older than the other doesn't necessarily mean that the older one is understanding more than the younger one, in my experience. And if you're interested in these science kits, but your kids are a little bit younger, there are, of course, the first chemistry sets and the kids' first science kits too. I think most of the the Western world has been exposed to different science kits anyways, and there are a variety of them. Some of them come in monthly packages that you can make commitments to and pay up front, and every month you get a new one, or you can go and find the ones that I just showed you at your local bookstore or wherever you would normally find curriculum. I've even got a space exploration kit, which I personally thought was a lot of fun. I'm sure you know that you can find all sorts of science content online on different platforms, like watchable platforms. Have you heard of CuriosityStream yet? If you've been introduced to that, or Knowledge Network, those are really solid ones. You can, of course, find documentaries on Netflix and Disney Channel. There's all sorts of things online. And remember, kids might see that as entertainment, but it's still educational. I'm not suggesting to put everything on a screen. I think it's really useful when you mix and match different approaches, give them options to play with things with their hands. Maybe they like to listen to podcasts. Brains On is a really great podcast. There's a bunch of science podcasts for kids, and they might want to do that while they're doing something with their hands, maybe playing Lego, drawing, whatever they're interested in. There are, of course, topics of science in Usborne books. Have you met the Usborne books? This is one of the very few things that I would be willing to sell. Usborne books always answer the questions. They keep it simple. They have really good graphics. They have interactive things that are either online or things that are manipulated with your hands, kind of kinesthetic. And there's so many topics. I'm not sure that there's a topic they haven't done yet. And for age groups right across the spectrum, definitely something that I would sell. Crash Course Kids, Free School, Make Me a Genius, Learning Junction, Khan Academy, they're all online resources, so many different apps that you can consider. And you or your child thinks of that as entertainment, but you see it as science. Of course, you can always take advantage of different sciencey activities when we have the potential to go to science centers, or a couple of years ago we had a mobile transport system that was intended for the Olympics when it was in Vancouver Olympics, and it visited our town, and they showed us mock intubations and emergency equipment. And that is one thing that my kids haven't been able to see in real time. Actually, truth, my oldest was, I think, 11 when she watched an intubation when she was sitting beside her dad in pediatrics when we were in Ghana. So anyways, most kids don't see intubations in real time. And, you know, you take advantage of those moments, those things that are offered in your community, because there are always different things that you just have to remember. This is a science activity. You do not have to see it as coming in the form of a lecture with memorization, with testing, and with grades. That is one form, that is one approach. I certainly have the child that appreciates some of that. And I also have more kids that don't, and that would rather just pursue their interests. I personally love botany. I love learning about plants and growth and garden and trees and leaves and how things unfurl in spring and how they die away and the process or the cycle of death and growth. I love all things botany, and definitely didn't enjoy that when I was a child, and I don't have one child that is truly interested in that now. But you can include your interests as a homeschool parent too. It doesn't always have to be just what your kid wants. It can actually be your interests as well. You can incorporate them all. Hey, have I mentioned you could get an animal? In the last few years, we started our homestead, And we started, I think I spent 10 years researching chickens, laying hens. And when I finally got them, it was so exciting. I was elated. I think that video is on my YouTube channel. So excited getting chickens for the first time. And it turns out they are super easy to care for. This year, I have been raising meat birds, Cornish rocks. First time raising ones that will end up in my freezer. They are a lot, they're not so complicated. They like to eat, they like to drink, they like to poop. They're very greedy in their eating and their drinking, and they are very large now. I'm actually processing them tomorrow, so I might be vegetarian tomorrow afternoon, but they are very large. And it is a world, it's a different world engaging them than a laying hen. I also, at the same time I got laying hens, I got a puppy, a Great Pyr puppy, which if you know anything about large guardian dogs, this is not your regular lassie. There are all sorts of things we've had to learn about her. But she requires not only research to figure out and learn and train, and it's a real challenge to train this kind of a dog, and it has been a real effort for our family, and we've done a lot with her. And yet it's been also an education. And she is a welcome family member, my 5th child. She probably is as much effort as any child I've had. I love her to bits. Violet is her name, and I probably wouldn't get a Great Pyr again, even though she absolutely keeps my chickens safe. And I'm not afraid of walking outside in the dark, even though we have cougars and bears and coyotes in the mountains where we live. Getting an animal definitely is training ground for kids. Learning animals is veterinary medicine, right? So, or even if they have a fish, or if they choose to buy a fish, like my son, who he was 10 last year, and he and I purchased together a book or a box by Rebecca Keller, Kehler, on physics, and it was geared toward his age. There's a set of experiments, and it was all about physics, and it was really just a simplified version compared to what my high school physics student was doing at the time. And he chose it with me, which I encourage you to use as a principle for all of your content, whatever you're purchasing. If you're buying any resources, definitely include the kids. Having said that, he didn't want to finish it. He was very interested in spending most of his spare time researching aquarium fish, researching algae, researching how quickly algae grew, researching how to get rid of algae, how to clean, how regularly to clean, what snails or things he needs to buy in order to get rid of that algae, what water temperature is required, what kind of water to use, all the questions. He's reading, researching that, and I'm thinking to myself, it's just not getting to science. He needs to do his physics book. Yep. That was months ago, even though I know in my head, he's doing science. He's doing aquarium, tropical aquarium development. And I even had a book on it in my homeschool room that he consulted, and I still wasn't thinking it was science. Because it wasn't the prescribed curriculum that we'd already purchased. And I didn't have an impact on him being interested in it. So I had a hard time mentally switching to, he finds it entertaining, and this is biology. So that's one thing that he still is doing, actually. In fact, you can hear the aquarium in the background here. One of my girls really loved this book, Chris Hadfield. He is an astronaut, and it's his photographs being up in space. It's an astronaut's guide to life on Earth. So if you're into astronomy, or maybe your child just wants to look at the pictures and you can tell them what they are, salt from evaporation ponds in a Great Salt Lake in Utah and what it looks like from space. There are pictures from all over the Earth. have to recommend this to you. Different kids at different ages are interested in this. This is definitely something that my 11-year-old can do. It's Science Experiments from Janice Van Cleve. She has all sorts of science experiment books. It says at the bottom, exciting ideas, projects, and activities for schools, science fairs, and just plain fun. Spoken from a science teacher and definitely homeschool mom that knows all about how to engage kids. It's very simple. There's not a lot of color in there. This one specifically is called Rock Bridge. Its purpose, it tells you the purpose of the experiment is to demonstrate how natural bridges stand, and it tells you what materials you need. Here you need books and 2 flat chairs at the same height. It gives you a procedure. It tells you what the results are and why it works. This is a very simple one. There are plenty even, in the chemistry, physics, and I think astronomy that we have that you actually do need to go buy a few different things, but they're not difficult to access. And if you are looking for something that's a little more challenging to use, you'll probably find it in the home science tools or other online homeschool curriculum vendors. When I read and have reread Susan Wise Bauer's homeschool book or tome on classical homeschooling, I got lots of ideas on content for science for actually all the different subject areas. And it was a useful period learning about classical homeschooling and the general stages of development for kids and learning phases for many children. It was useful because she introduced me to different encyclopedias like this one. This is the Kingfisher Encyclopedia, Animal Encyclopedia. We have another DK Science Encyclopedia, and it is just what it sounds like. It is like wiki in book form. And maybe I'm old school, or maybe I'm just old, but I find that the content of these books are useful, especially if you're someone that doesn't want free-flowing screen time use. But even still, there's something to be, our kids to be taught that you can find information in books too, and learn how to wield a library as well as you can wield a screen. It's got value. They're not going away. As a writer, I definitely don't think books are going away. And so much content, they can get really deep, they can dig deep in these kinds of books if they are the sort that like to do their own reading. And something that we have done over the years is, even though we have this encyclopedia that's beautiful and complete compared to anything I could create, we have created lap books for kids, or I should say the kids have created lap books of animal encyclopedias. So whatever study they've done of any of the books or any of the animals that they're learning, they actually can draw their own picture. They can discuss the genus. They can discuss the length of life cycle, or how they reproduce, or what they eat, or their habitat. They can create their own lap books, their own encyclopedia of animals. We have, of course, done that with underwater creatures as well. I love these books. These are apologia books, and every type of science is definitely represented in these books, and they are some at a very middle school level and some of them at a high school level, but they're very accessible to read together, or the child can use them on their own. There's also an activity book that they can use alongside these books. They are on the pricey side, but they are ones you will return to over and over. And if you go on to a homeschool swap and chat thread on Facebook, you are probably going to find them at a lot lower cost than you would if you were going to an online curriculum vendor. And I'm going to show you the one that my son used this year. I'm not sure if he's gone through absolutely everything, but there are actually a lot of options, like different things that you can do in the catapults and crossbows kit as well. He is very interested in that this year. But something that I'm doing this year that I haven't done quite with the same intention. I've done it naturally, but I'm doing it quite intentionally because I'm taking my own advice. And it is to observe my child. Instead of creating a big schedule of activities that I want for my child to do each day, I have been over the last week and a half or so, when we began more formal learning time, I have been watching him. I've shown him all the resources that I thought were kind of cool, and now I've been watching how he's actually engaging them. And just as most unschooled families will tell you, when you watch your child engage something and they're fully engaged, they usually take a long time. They spend a long time in that activity. I think it was a podcast that Julie Bogart shared last week or the week before, that it doesn't take a lot of effort for you to allow your child to go play Lego. In fact, they get lost in it for hours, and you're not asking, hey, are you doing your Lego yet? Are you still doing your Lego? Have you done your Lego long enough? They're doing their Lego, they're playing, they're having fun, because we see it as an entertainment, so then we just kind of let them do their thing. Surely Lego counts as an educational activity. I know schools that include it as an activity and have a lot of, have a significant budget for it, or maybe it's just the teachers that are bringing it in, but I've seen these incredible Lego builds put together by a group of kids in a school. And I mean, it's a learning activity. It's engineering, to say the least, building. But when our kids are left to their own devices to play Lego, or to be on a screen, to play on an app, or to play whatever they want to play, they dig deep into it and they spend a long time doing it. And I've noticed that with my son over the last couple of weeks now, that he really is spending a lot longer time doing whatever he's doing. Something that is unique to my 11-year-old is that he is a prolific reader. Once upon a time, I asked him, have you noticed a difference between most of your peers' vocabulary and yours? And he said, yes, I have. The reason is because, first of all, his dad does have a noticeably large vocabulary. For the 20-some years that I've known him, he still comes out with certain words that I've never heard anyone use before. And I've definitely not heard him use those words before, but he was a large reader when he was young as well. And if my vocabulary sounds significant, I'm not sure it always does, but if it does, it's most definitely influenced by my husband. But my husband was a big reader. My son is a big reader. And yet, would you believe that even though my kiddo can spend hours reading books, he loves doing it. It's entertainment. And so my instinct is, but is it educational if he wants to be doing it for hours? Sigh. I can identify even with myself how silly that sounds. Maybe if he was just reading Diary of a Wimpy Kid, the series, over and over, which one of my kids has done, by the way, as their primary literary material, then I would be concerned. Maybe. But definitely it's not, and he reads right across the spectrum. So my instinct is still to think, but it isn't prescribed, so then therefore it can't be something educational. I'm still learning. So I'm observing my kiddo over the last couple of weeks to see where he's going. I will tell you as a caveat that I am one of those moms that limits screen time, and I make sure that it's after dinner time. And I like to mix things up. I still want to include games as a family. It doesn't happen every day now, especially as our kids are getting older. They like to have some time alone. They like to do their jobs and go to youth groups and do all the activities. But we have a lot of games, and I like to make sure we have time to do that. I make sure that we have time to do a read aloud at some point together, my 11-year-old and I. So I am a screen time limiter. So that means, really, you know what that means? You're giving your child, this is my argument for this. You're giving your child time to be bored. You're giving your child time to have solitude, to have quiet. Solitude and boredom eventually breed something clever and curious, unless it's trouble. But I have heard that story too. It can be trouble, but oftentimes solitude and boredom can breed some really interesting stuff. It can also breed sibling rivalry and sibling challenges if kids are always sticking together and have nothing to do. But I have seen it over and over and over, the things that even this summer, my 11-year-old, I always heard homeschool families do this, but I always wondered, is this like a cult myth, or does this really happen, that they start making their own games? And I'm like, but there's always like Hasbro, there's always, game companies, there's always one more game to buy. But the truth is they get really clever. They play so many games so often that they start to create their own games. And so he makes tons of games, but I was most tickled by this one game that he put together. That was a lot of work. He had to get a piece of wood. He had to learn how to use a drill to make little holes to create his own Chinese checkerboard with little tiny pebbles. And he painted all the pebbles. That was a lot of work. And I thought that was super cool that he did that. So solitude and boredom can breed that. Right now he's starting design of a tree house in the backyard. And since my husband and I built the chicken fence and we built a place to cut wood, maybe we can help him do that too. Something simple anyways. So there's always like solitude and boredom are a bountiful, combination of things, and don't be afraid of it. What else can I tell you about structuring an 11-year-old's education in science? Have you heard the general theme? Find fun stuff to do, strew it around the house, just kind of let it be out and about, give them open space where they aren't necessarily preoccupied in a structured way, and watch them get curious about science-related stuff. If you have questions about anything that I've shared, or you have questions about something I did not answer, please put it in the comments down below. This was fun. I think it's fun because I really love science, and we have explored all sorts of topics across the years. I literally think there's nothing that we haven't touched on, even quantum physics, which is like, woo, way over my head. But everybody's had a question about something, has pursued something. There is no way that we didn't hit all the learning outcomes of a normal schooled education, because we have gone in every direction. So my self-care strategy for the week, little shift in discussion here, is this. I have a meme on my Instagram page, Homeschool Mama Selfcare, right now, where there are two pencil drawings of a person going halfway up a mountain. One of those people is looking up and saying, "Whoa, wow, there's so much more to climb." And someone at the very same height is looking down, and they are saying, "Wow, look at how much I've climbed." I think that visual helps remind us how impressive our perspective can change everything for us. So I encourage you to think in a way that helps you to see that you can do this homeschool thing, that you can actually take all the different aspects of family life and home education and parenting and life in general, and put it together and see how much you've accomplished already. All you need is a little intention and a couple kids, one child, and you can create a home education for your child that is satisfying. I am going to leave you with these thoughts from the podcast interview that I shared with you, that I released today. I had an excellent chat with Judy Arnall. She's written that book I was telling you about, Patience, but she's also written a few books, Unschooling to University is her most recent one. She shares how to deal with anger and how to teach dealing with anger in your home. And as homeschool moms, there is no question that we human beings are going to experience anger in our homeschools, that we are going to feel frustrated with our kids at different times. Well, these are her suggestions: to have a yes list and have a no list. With your children, decide together what are the ways that are appropriate and acceptable to be angry. That is your yes list. And have the no list that says these are the behaviors when we feel angry that we are not allowed to engage in. Recognize that anger is really just a signal for change. It is a normal human emotion that all of us have. And as homeschool parents, it comes in a package that might be unique to us. It is, it's common. I know for myself that I grew up seeing anger manifested in a way that wasn't healthy, and I wasn't taught how to engage my feelings at all. I was kind of taught to not feel my feelings, or certainly not express them. And because of that, I've had to learn this whole emotional regulation in homeschooling as a parent along the way. And I have had to learn that anger isn't a bad thing. It's a normal human emotion that says something is not right. It doesn't feel right. Sometimes it means that we have to change our perspective and learn that actually whatever it is we're angry at is not quite how we saw things. We need to reframe it. On the other hand, sometimes it isn't right, and we need to place boundaries, or we need to do something about it. It's a signal for us that something needs to change. And she says, you can change yourself, you can remove yourself, or you can negotiate for someone to change themselves. Excellent advice from Judy Arnall on how to engage anger in your homeschool. Well, I hope I've been able to answer a few of your questions. I hope I've given you some food for thought. And if you need anything, let me know. Until next week, I hope you and your kids have a charmed week and turn all those challenges into your charms. All the best.